And welcome back, everyone. This is College Football with Sam here, talking to you live about the College Football Playoff Quarterfinals. Just excuse me as I adjust things. Yeah, my volume's gone temporarily, but that's okay. Just the way that, the way I've been sitting for these past few days because we've been watching these games live. We've been live for all these games except for the second half of Georgia Notre Dame. That was so that I could really eat and actually live a normal life and then, come on here and do this. But absolutely no worries. We're here to talk about all that transpired in the College Football Playoff Quarterfinals. So that's what we're going to talk about today, along with a few bowl games and some other topics as well that really relate to the Rose Bowl. In large part, this is going to be a Rose Bowl special because, well, this was in my personal opinion, supposed to be the game of the week, and it was anything but that. In fact, it was the least competitive game, at least for the first half, which is really the half that matters if a game is going to be that lopsided. And and now we have an Ohio State, Texas, and Penn State, Notre Dame semifinal, which we will be doing previews for those sometime in the next 48 hours. Live show will be determined when that will happen, either Friday or Saturday. But I'll get to that sometime tomorrow, let you guys know when that is. Anyway, tonight's business, comment in the live chat. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, because we're going to definitely be going live from here on out Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. If I can't, due to, let's say, an exam happening because I am in school, I'll always let you guys know. But Mondays and Wednesdays from here on out will be live. Those will be live shows at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Those are blocks that I think are convenient for a lot of people. Analytically, YouTube says they're the best, and also I don't know too many other people who go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. So I think that works. But we'll talk about these quarterfinals, talk about some other topics surrounding it. Just make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we just have so much to talk about that I'm very excited for. So welcome in, everyone. Again, this is a college football playoff reaction show. Ohio State, Oregon is the big topic of the day, but we'll also talk about Notre Dame and Georgia and how Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart today in the Sugar Bowl. We'll talk about Texas, Arizona State and the Peach Bowl, an exciting Peach Bowl where Texas nearly choked, but they didn't do the meme being Texas is back in sarcasm. They're still in it. They can still win the national championship. We'll even talk a little bit about Boise State versus Penn State, the Fiesta Bowl. Even though I already did a reaction on that, I have some more thoughts on that game, specifically on Penn State, that I want to discuss. And we'll talk about the Citrus Bowl, the ReliaQuest Bowl, and other topics. So let's jump right in. And what I want to do, excluding the Rose Bowl, because I think we got to do that later in the show. There's a lot that I want to talk about in relationship to the Rose Bowl and Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, their players, their coaches. First and foremost, what I want to do is just talk about the non-Rose Bowl topics and go from things that I thought were the weirdest to the most expected. So let's start off with that. I think that nothing was weirder this week. Nothing, and I mean this, nothing was weirder about this week than Michigan humiliating Alabama. The final score, of course, being Michigan 19, Alabama 13. That's it. That was the final score. And in the first quarter, the score was Michigan 16, Alabama nothing. And Alabama gave up 3 turnovers inside of their own territory. Excuse me right there. But yeah, nothing was weirder this week than Michigan humiliating Alabama by a score of 19-13. Both teams had under 300 total yards. Both teams had at least 1 turnover. Alabama had 3, Michigan had 1. Michigan had 38 minutes and 12 seconds of possession. And the 7-5, 5-4 defending national champions who didn't even reach the college football playoff or come close humiliated the first team out in the 11th ranked Alabama Crimson Tide, who fell to 9-4, and for the first time since 2007, Alabama did not achieve double-digit wins. Just got to shrug your shoulders at that. There's nothing else to say. Alabama is the most talented roster in the nation, according to recruiting rankings. Michigan had almost all, if not all, of their first-rounders opt out. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, they weren't playing. Will Johnson continued his tradition of the previous few games of not playing due to an injury. Colston Loveland didn't play. Donovan Edwards didn't play. Kalel Mullings didn't play. Michigan had a few players in the transfer portal. Miles Hinton, their best offensive lineman, didn't play. And yet Michigan was just getting endless pressure on Jalen Milroe and the Crimson Tide. Michigan was just doing so well on defense in this game. They held Alabama to 2.3 yards per carry, 68 rushing yards. Milroe only had 7 yards on the ground. He had a QBR of 26.4, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. And again, in that first quarter, I say again because we already talked about the 3 turnovers, but all 3 of those turnovers came in the first quarter for Alabama, and all of them were inside of Alabama territory. Even the first drive Alabama had, where it was a turnover on downs, not a fumble or a pick, Michigan sacked Alabama all the way back in their own territory, despite them snapping the football at Michigan's somewhere in between the 45 and 40-yard line. I want to say the 41, 42. It was 4th and 1. Bama wanted to throw, and Michigan just sacked Milroe into the turf. So before I get any further into this, I want to invite you all to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and also comment your reaction to this game down below. And I have a few questions for you. Number 1, I want to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pressure, competitive pressure, of course. I don't think Kalen DeBoer's on the hot seat after 1 year at Alabama, but maybe he is. How much competitive pressure is Kalen DeBoer under at Alabama entering 2025? How much competitive pressure is also on Sharon Moore entering 2025? And what are your expectations for these two teams entering 2025, entering next season? For Michigan, do you think they have to go to the playoffs or the season's a failure? For Alabama, that's obviously the case, but do you think they need to make a playoff run or the season is a failure? And also, specifically to Michigan, does this restore faith a little bit in Michigan's program, in their culture, in a coaching staff that I put a lot of heat on, that many others put a lot of heat on early in the season, or do you need to see more? Answer those down in the comment section below. And if you want to support the channel and also talk college football and engage with me via the Discord server, check out the links in the pinned comment and the description where you can join the Discord server where we talk college football 24/7. And also you will find ways there, merchandise store, Patreon page, to support the channel monetarily. And again, like, subscribe, hit the bell, share the video around, do all those things. It's very important to hit the bell. That way you get notified when I go live like we are right now. So getting back to what was the ReliaQuest Bowl, what was crazy was just how quickly things unraveled for Alabama. And I feel like part of it was they didn't want to be there. But if you're an Alabama fan, that's not what you want to hear. You don't want to hear that your team just quit when they faced adversity. Because Alabama, what they failed to do is control the controllables this season. They beat Georgia, a Georgia team that now we know, of course, is limited, and we've known that for a while now, given their losses in the regular season to Alabama, to Ole Miss, how they've played week to week, near losses to Georgia Tech and to Texas. Felt like they were kind of outrunning the speeding train, and it was Notre Dame who ended up being the speeding train and not any other team. But the Crimson Tide, beat Georgia. They looked electric at times the first few weeks. Then they lost to Vanderbilt, a historic loss. They then, of course, lost to Tennessee in a game where Tennessee did to Alabama very much what Michigan kind of did. Jalen Milroe couldn't run. Tennessee's defensive line was eating up Alabama's offensive line, and therefore Tennessee didn't have to do much offensively to win. And then Oklahoma, kind of the same deal. Oklahoma shut Alabama down. And what do we see right here? Same thing. Alabama just wasn't elite enough on defense to negate their offensive issues, and their offensive issues were very deep. Jalen Milroe struggles to read the field. He struggles with accuracy. He relies on his athleticism a bit too much. And Alabama's supporting cast isn't perfect. The offensive line, for all of its talent, is not properly developed. It's overrated. The rushing attack, kind of the same deal because of how it depends on the offensive line and also Jalen Milroe's legs. Outside of Ryan Williams, they don't really have an X-factor wide receiver, and his production has tanked as the season has gone on. Early in the year, him and Jeremiah Smith were understandably comparable true freshman prospects. Ryan Williams has alien talent, but he sort of disappeared as the season's gone on because people figured out Alabama. And I think it was the wise decision for both Alabama and also for Milroe to go to the NFL draft. I think that with how limited this current QB class is, it's just better for Jalen Milroe to go off to the NFL where he still has potential, where he has some good characteristics, and an NFL team can try to make use of his services and maybe develop him. For Alabama, they need a new quarterback if they want to win at a high level, especially with their head coach, Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer needs someone who is an effective elite passer. Jalen Milroe is not that. And the only way Jalen Milroe was going to work in Kalen DeBoer's system, the legs were always going to be an added bonus for Milroe in this Kalen DeBoer offense. They were not intended to be the feature. And they just, for whatever reason, couldn't develop him into a vastly superior passer. So that's the Alabama side of things. For the Michigan side of things, Michigan was able to get pressure. Michigan had 5 sacks, 6 TFLs. Michigan did not run the football well, but they ran it often. They had 51 carries for 115 yards, 2.3 yards per carry. Jordan Marshall had 4.3 yards per carry, 100 rushing yards, long of 24 on 23 carries. He looked like a trooper, even as a true freshman, and that's a bright sign for Michigan's future at running back, as they have Benjamin Hall, Justice Haynes from Alabama, backup running back to Jam Miller. He's transferring in to Ann Arbor. Davis Warren, 9 of 12 for 73 yards, actually had a QBR of an 88.8, 1 touchdown, 6.1 yards per pass attempt. I think a huge part of that was probably the good field position that he was always in due to Alabama turnovers and the fact that really no special teams unit outside, of course, Michigan's kicking game and a bit of Alabama's kicking game too. Graham Nicholson made a long field goal of 51, really showed out. Alabama only had one. They didn't even have one punt inside the 20. It was a touchback. I was misreading that there. Hudson Holenbeck from Michigan had 2 punts inside of the 20. Both punters had pretty good averages, but special teams outside of kicking was not the real story. It was turnovers. It was fundamental soundness. It was the fact that Alabama was slipping and sliding all across the field, and Michigan was only doing that when they were celebrating a first down. Like, Michigan was the more balanced team, literally. They weren't slipping and sliding and falling everywhere. They looked more prepared. They looked like they wanted it more. And that's a credit to Michigan. It's an explanation as to why Michigan won. It's a deep concern if you're Alabama. And circling back to Michigan, what do we make of Michigan's staff entering 2025? Because I still have my questions. I genuinely do. I think Sharon Moore has progressed and improved as the year's gone on, but I think Michigan still needs a whole lot more out of him and his staff and also his roster before they can say that he's the guy. I wonder with Wink Martindale how much of the past few games' success has been a credit to him, the talent he has, or the limitations of the offenses he's played. I mean, think about Indiana. They have a talent limitation. Michigan had the line of scrimmage advantage, and they don't have an alien player on offense. Ohio State has alien players everywhere on offense, but Michigan's D-line is so good that they just blew up Ohio State's offensive line, and Ohio State wanted to run the football and insisted on doing so even when it didn't work. And as for Alabama, a little bit unmotivated. They've been clunky on offense all season long, and Michigan once again had a line of scrimmage edge on defense. So with Wink Martindale and the defensive staff, I like a lot of the coaches there, but I also like a lot of the coaches that Alabama, let's say, has. And the reality for these two teams and what they can find in common is this season has not been good enough for Alabama or for Michigan. The Alabama and Michigan programs should be ashamed of these two seasons, and they need to figure things out. They have to rebound. They have to move on, because otherwise, next season, if the pressure cooker isn't already turned up to high, it will be for these two programs if these seasons are replicated. I mean, if Kalen DeBoer goes 9-4 again next year, people are talking about him on the hot seat. If Michigan goes 8-5 next year with a schedule that looks more favorable than this year's, Sherrone Moore will be on the hot seat. So, down years for two college football blue bloods who over the past 3-4 years have played for national championships, have won playoff games. In the 2020s decade, Alabama has won a national championship. So has Michigan. They've been at the top of college football in terms of developing NFL talent. So we'll see what happens in 2025. More of an optimistic outlook for Michigan after that bowl game than Alabama. But again, bowl games aren't what they used to be. A lot of opt-outs on both sides. Just a few things to keep in mind. My reaction and assessment of the game. Alabama could just never crawl back after that early deluge of Michigan defense, of pressure, of forcing turnovers, of capitalizing on their opportunities. And that resulted in a 19-13 Michigan win, which Alabama opened up the game as an 11.5-point favorite, and the line rose to 16.5. Everyone was betting Alabama to cover. Huge, huge win for Vegas. Basically free money, taking candy from a baby for Vegas, is I think almost 90 or 80% of all the money was placed on Alabama to not just win, but to cover. My goodness, just absolute disaster for the public. That's really all I have to see. I see that we have a super chat here, so let me answer that. This is from, just things aren't exactly working. Let me pull this up on the pop-out chat here. I can do this because we're in a pretty good rhythm right now. Okay, what was I doing? Yeah, let me get to that. So, I mean, that was a surprising game to me right there. It was a very, very, very surprising game. Okay, so Justin Ziegler, thank you for the $20 super chat. After this week, Michigan looks to have a bright future, and especially with Underwood coming. As per the college football playoff, it's Ohio State's to lose with how much they dominated Tennessee and Oregon. The Rose Bowl in particular scares me. We'll talk about Ohio State and their domination of Oregon. Of course, 2 dominant performances in a row. I do think that there is an optimistic tone to Michigan with Underwood coming in because he has been talked about as a generational quarterback talent. For many people I trust, and also just from the public visible analysts. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see how Michigan operates in 2025 and how they perform with the schedule that they're given, with the talent that is returning. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a wait and see for me too, because a lot of those 5 losses were winnable games. Think about Washington. Think about Illinois. Think about Indiana. I mean, that right there, you're talking about Michigan going from 7-5 in the regular season to 10-2. Just is what it is. And if you add in the fact that maybe Michigan gets a transfer portal QB and some more offensive players from the portal entering 2024, well, maybe Michigan competes for more than just 9 or 10 regular season wins. I mean, it was a very disappointing year for Michigan. They have to learn from that. They have to grow, because if they don't, Ohio State's not stopping. I mean, they have their own questions still. No one this year is a generational team, but they're not stopping. Penn State, if if Penn State simply wins the Orange Bowl, they're going to level up as a program. And we'll talk about that soon. Oregon is not stopping. This Oregon loss to Ohio State reminded me a bit, just a bit, of, how do I say this? It reminded me a bit of Ohio State losing to Michigan in 2021, or of Ohio State losing to Alabama in 2020. I think that both are imperfect, but the reason that Oregon's loss to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl reminds me of those games is after those games, Ryan Day was pushed to make some changes and to pivot, especially the Michigan game. And that's a hint for what we're going to talk about later in the show, but I do think that Oregon will be pushed in that direction. But again, we'll talk about that later. So let's move on. Thank you again, Justin Ziegler, for the $20 super chat. I appreciate that a whole lot. So let's continue now and talk about, again, we're going from weirdest to what I expected. So let's talk about Texas escaping Arizona State. Remember the meme, "We're back"? Well, that meme almost came to life again, because if Texas lost to Arizona State, I think that the college football community would have collectively, taken a, I forget what it's called, but it's a thing that you this is kind of, I have to look this up, so I'm gonna restart this. Thing you put in your mouth to blow parties. Immunity, as Josh Pate would say. A party horn. Okay. Yeah, okay, so we're going to restart that. But yeah, I think everyone except for Texas fans would have taken a party horn and just went boom with it. I think everyone would have done that if Arizona State upset Texas. 31-24, I knew that you all were thinking along with me, oh my gosh, like this is really going to happen. But also a part of me thought, you know what, this won't happen because it's college football, and upsets, especially this late in the year, are very, very rare. At the end of the day, depending on how this season ends, this will not even be close to 2007 in terms of chaos. It won't. Because if Ohio State wins it all, well, it's just kind of like, chaotic regular season, but at the end of the day, it's still, basically the preseason favorite to win it all outside of Georgia, who kind of fell apart as the year went on. Now, I'm going to also take back that statement, because if one of Notre Dame or Penn State wins it all, that's a chaotic season. The Orange Bowl side of the bracket has an opportunity to create some real chaos here. The Cotton Bowl side of the bracket is kind of the lame bracket in terms of if you're a fan of chaos, because Texas and OSU were, I think, top 3 or certainly top 4 of preseason favorites to win it all. But anyway, let me get back on topic here. Remember the meme, "We're back"? I'm pretty sure that meme was running through the minds of many of you, with Sam Ehlinger proclaiming after their 2018 Sugar Bowl win over Georgia. Also, more on the Sugar Bowl loss by Georgia later, just in a different year, many more years down the line. But anyway, I think that if Arizona State would have upset Texas, the entire college football universe would have taken a party horn and blown it in Steve Sarkisian's face. Steve Sarkisian has been under, I think, a lot of rightful criticism, and maybe it's just me, but I've criticized him game in and game out for managing some games rather poorly, or for never really having a team that has a functional red zone offense, even when they have all of this eye candy, all of these weapons, elite recruiting, elite trench play, fantastic development. There's something off with Texas. There was something off with them last year. It was the secondary. It was in part Quinn Ewers' inconsistency. There's something off about Texas this season. they are even more lethargic and anemic on offense than they were at times last season. And while their defense is elite, we've seen now for 2 games in a row on the biggest stage when it matters most that Texas and their inconsistencies on offense hurt the defense, and also that the defense can be got if you use certain methods to try and move them. We've seen it from Clemson. We've seen it from Arizona State. And Texas is going to get their biggest test of the year from their defense's perspective against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl on December 10th. Or not December 10th, major gaffe by me right there. January 10th of 2025. Almost wish it was December 10th with how much has, changed in certain aspects in regards to the brackets, all the chaos, different things. But anyway, I encourage you, before we move on and talk about what was a fantastic Peach Bowl, to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live, when we release new content here, and also comment your thoughts down below and answer me this question. How confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that Texas will beat Ohio State? And also, in regards to Arizona State, how long do you think Kenny Dillingham stays with the Sun Devils before he gets a bigger job? You can say he'll never leave. There's a chance that happens, but Kenny Dillingham is going to be a name that is going to be highly sought after the coaching performance that he has put on display this season. It's been one of the most impressive, and some would argue it's been the most impressive in all of college football. So answer me those questions. Again, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell. By commenting your thoughts on this game down below, you're automatically entered into my giveaway. The 4 winners of my giveaway, the items which are $20 Visa card, $20 gift card to my merchandise store. 2 of them will be announced on January 9th at halftime of the Orange Bowl. The other 2 will be announced halftime the following day of the Cotton Bowl, where you'll be live to do play-by-play and color commentary for those games. If you want to support the channel monetarily and also talk college football with me in a Discord server, the links to all those and other great things are in the pinned comment and the description. But let's get back on topic here, shall we? So I think that when I look at this game, and I have to think about it because there's a lot of thoughts that flow through my mind. I think the moral of the story here, if you're Texas, is it's really difficult because Texas has done this all year where they're offensively inconsistent, but they put up more points than they did in this game, even against some better defenses, or at least similar points against better defenses. And they've not been able to run the football all year, and they haven't had this same scare against a team of Arizona State's talent level. But I think the lesson to be learned here is that when your defense is on the field for 38 minutes in regulation and over 30 minutes by the end of the third quarter, they're going to get tired, especially when they are playing a battering ram like Cam Scatterbo and a quarterback in Sam Leavitt who can maneuver all around the field and has very impressive stamina. And also an elite coaching staff. You got Marcus Arroyo, who I think has done a phenomenal job this year with Arizona State's offense. And then Kenny Dillingham is a great planner, a great coach, a great motivator, and prepared his team for a 60-plus minute battle. And at the end of the day, Quinn Ewers had one of his better games statistically of the year, 20 of 30, 322 yards, 10.7 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, a pick, 92 quarterback efficiency rating, and Texas couldn't run the ball. And Quinn Ewers accounted for all of Texas's touchdowns, all 4 of them, outside of Silas Bolden with the punt return for a touchdown. But all 4 of the offensive touchdowns were on Quinn Ewers. Rushing touchdown, 3 passing touchdowns, and Texas only averaged 1.8 yards per carry for 53 yards. I mean, they couldn't run the football. them rushing the football against Arizona State looked like Texas rushing the football against Georgia in the SEC championship game, who has one of the better defensive fronts in all of college football in terms of size, in terms of speed, in terms of discipline, in terms of all of these other things. They have one of the best, if not the best, defensive front. And defensive front is not just defensive line, but like linebackers. It's incredibly hard to run the football on Georgia. I did not think that Texas would struggle this mightily to run the football against Arizona State. I mean, that was the biggest reason why Arizona State got in the game, like back in the game. It was 17-3 at half, remember? And then Arizona State got down the field once again inside the red zone, and Texas's defense got a goal line stand at the 2. And then Quinn Ewers hands it off to Quintravion Wisner. Texas's O-line gives up outside leverage and also inside leverage, and Quintravion Wisner gets popped, and the ball comes out. It's in the end zone, and Ewers picks it up and falls down so that he doesn't fumble it, and Arizona State gets a safety. Then Arizona State drives down the field, and they kick a field goal, which was strange because they've been aggressive all game, but I think they figured we just need to get points here. So they kicked a field goal and made it 17-8. Then Texas went down and got a touchdown on a 5-minute, 24-second drive. And then I thought the game was over at 24-8. But no, there's more. Arizona State drives down the field. It's 4th and 2 at like the Texas 42 or something. That's actually, yes, that's exactly where it was. 4th and 2 at the Texas 42. They toss it to Scadabo. You think it's going to be a disastrous run, but very quickly you realize, oh, they're going to force Scadabo to pass this thing. He throws it to Malik McClain, who has beaten the 2 Texas DBs who actually recognized it was going to be a halfback pass. Scadabo throws one of the worst passes I've ever seen. It looks like it's an offensive lineman who's never thrown a pass before, and all of a sudden he's playing quarterback. That's what Cam Scadabo looked like. The worst pass, no spiral. Malik McClain adjusts and catches it, goes into the end zone for a touchdown, and then 2-point conversion is good with a perfect Sam Leavitt throw. Then Texas, well, they get the ball back, and Ewers throws a pick. Scadabo makes an amazing catch down the sidelines where he torches Michael Taff, and then he runs into the end zone about like 2 plays later for a score. Then we get a failed 2-point conversion, a holding call on Texas. They committed a ton of penalties in this game, and then Scadabo runs into the end zone barreling again for a 2-point conversion. It was insanity. It was crazy. I mean, at one point early in the 4th, this was 7:44 left in the game. Texas had a 99.9% chance to win the game per FPI. 2nd and 10 at the 20. It was actually 3rd and 10 at the 50, pardon me, with 7:44 left to go. And then from there, we get into 1 minute 31 seconds left in the game. 1st and 10 at the ASU 30. And Arizona State's given a 62.4% chance to win this game after Bert Auburn misses his field goal. And then Texas, after Arizona State has to punt on that drive with a controversial no call on what looked to be a targeting initially, but I don't know the rules enough to say whether it was or wasn't, Texas goes down the field, and Bert Auburn kicks a field goal off the uprights. It was a really good game. It was crazy. It was impressive to watch how bad Texas was at pulling away. And it was also impressive to watch how Arizona State never quit. And I think that this was another game for Texas similar to Clemson. I don't know what it is. Whether Texas checks out too early or it's just guaranteed they're going to play 1 quarter of really terrible football. They can never pull away from anyone. It was the same thing last season. Nearly choked at TCU. Tried to lose to Kansas State after establishing a massive lead. Was down to Oklahoma for the whole game. Comes back, establishes some control, then completely implodes. With Washington just diced them for the entire game, And even though Texas had some matchup edges, they just couldn't execute. And the Alabama game, which they won early in the year, was an outlier. And it was also revealed that Alabama was pretty bad early in 2023. This season, early Michigan win. We all think it's very impressive, at least at the time. Well, turns out Michigan was 7-5 and was worse at the beginning of the year compared to the end of the year. Oklahoma, 34-3, good win for the rivalry, but Oklahoma had a losing record, 6-6. Program's on fire. The next best wins were what? Florida, without DJ Lagway. Texas A&M on the road, where the offense only put up 17 points and Ewers threw an awful pick six. Kentucky. It just, thinking about Texas under Steve Sarkisian, there's so much to praise. He has brought them back, but there are also things that still need to be fixed. And Texas is not, as of now, on the mountaintop. That can change, though. You know, if they beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, who's to say they're not going to win it all? I don't think anyone can, given how good Ohio State is right now. And as for Arizona State, before we close it all out here, what a job by Kenny Dillingham. You know, you got Colorado with infinitely more talent. Kansas State, Iowa State are better established. I mean, even Kansas has been more established as of recently than Arizona State has, because Arizona State was coming off of sanctions and just a really bad football team last season, really bad in some of the later years of Herm Edwards with the Sun Devils as their head coach. Utah, preseason favorite, more established team. Oklahoma State, same thing. Arizona State was picked either to be last or to be one of the worst teams, in the Big 12. And I was kind of there too. I put together a massive list of the best players in the Big 12. I didn't include anyone for Arizona State. That's a shame on me. But there's also to say how far above expectations Kenny Dillingham hit. And that's very impressive. And he's built a great staff, especially on offense, but also credit to that Arizona State defense, because they held Texas to 375 total yards. They forced a turnover. They forced him to punt several times. Texas only had 17 first downs, and they punted 3 times. They missed 2 of their field goals, which has to do with special teams where, look, Arizona State was the inferior team to Texas there. But Texas's O-line false started several times. Why? Because in run blocking, they couldn't block Arizona State's defensive line. And Arizona State also had 3 sacks. They had 9 tackles for loss, 4 passes defended against guys who, in terms of likely future NFL talent and certainly high school star rating, shouldn't even be playing in the same league or stadium as they are. It's impressive. So good for Kenny Dillingham. I don't know what Arizona State's future is next year, but I know that Sam Leavitt, if he stays there, is going to be one of the best, if not the best, quarterbacks in the Big 12 next season. And in a league that is deprived of blue-chip talent, having someone like Leavitt, having a coach like Dillingham, who, you know, has gotten recruits from Texas, like whether it's from the portal, where several former Texas players were mentioned. Arizona State's bringing in some transfers, for example, from other programs they have, and they've been very successful there. And again, their staff is good. I think that Marcus Arroyo, very similar to Pete Kwiatkowski at Texas and Johnny Nansen, they've rebuilt sides of the football that came under intense scrutiny or were just simply not good or had very, very big flaws last season. And Kwiatkowski's defense is very much improved. It's one of the best in the country, might be the best in the country. It, again, looks like Ohio State's that right now, but for a while during the regular season, it looked like Texas here. Arroyo has turned this offense into something that is quite incredible. And then you have, you know, Brian Ward as the defensive coordinator. You have Hines Ward as the assistant coach and wide receivers coach. He's a guy who had a ton of success in the NFL, legend in the NFL, best of the best, and he is Arizona State's wide receivers coach. Just absolutely incredible. So kudos to Arizona State, kudos to Texas. it's time to talk about another game here. So we'll do that, and we'll pivot rather quickly to Notre Dame punking Georgia. So this one wasn't too big of a surprise to me. Marcus Freeman out coaching Kirby Smart was, but the result of this game, a little bit shocking, but also not much. Remember, I picked Georgia to win 16-14. That was a point total of 30 points. The point total here was 33 points. I knew it was going to be a low-scoring game. I knew that Notre Dame had the more balanced roster and was analytically better. I even said during my brief live stream of the first half of this game that last night I was tempted to say that Notre Dame was going to win and change my pick, but I didn't. Sort of regret that, of course, with this result, but it's not the most surprising thing. I mean, Georgia, just as limited as they are, is more limited than Notre Dame, and plus, Notre Dame did something that I didn't expect, which was, well, they outcoached Kirby Smart. So let's talk about this game. Now. Bless me. So, a little bit of a breath here. I'm a little bit warm. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish finally, in technical terms, has broken their New Year's Six Bowl losing streak. There were many people being a little bit finicky about whether Notre Dame's win over Indiana counted as that epic postseason win that they had been lacking for so long or not. I think the people that were discounting that were idiots, or at least a bit idiotic in that moment, because look, the postseason has radically changed since the last time Notre Dame won what is now classified as a New Year's Six Bowl versus what was then classified as a major bowl/New Year's Six Bowl. Last time they did that was in the 90s. They've racked off 2 in the span of 2 weeks. Beating Indiana at home in South Bend, which I classify as kind of a New Year's Six Bowl-esque win. And then they go to the Sugar Bowl and they beat Georgia. And they don't just beat Georgia, they punk Georgia. They did to Georgia what Georgia usually does to some other teams. When they beat teams, they don't always destroy them. In fact, for much of this season, Georgia has caught itself a bit with its pants down, but they've always pulled their pants back up. They've rallied, they've overcome adversity, and they've won a lot of football games in close fashion. And Notre Dame did that today. And they also won the coaching battle. They didn't just have the superior players in terms of discipline, execution, and also talent and experience in multiple positions. They outcoached Georgia. And I think that was the biggest surprise to me, and also the most pleasant surprise to me. This was the biggest win of the Marcus Freeman era. This was the biggest win for Notre Dame football in the 21st century easily, and you could probably extend it back into part of the 20th century. For Notre Dame fans, I will tell you right now, it's real. You only have one more game to go before you play in the national championship game. Penn State in the Orange Bowl. And then, between the winner of Texas and Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, if you beat Penn State, you'll play them for it all. You are there. You are oh so close. Remember back in the 4-team playoff era where it was just good enough to make it? And that was an accomplishment for almost every program, just because you were going to be among the top 4 teams, or maybe if you got blown out, you'd still be among the top 10. Well, that's what Notre Dame has reached right now, in my opinion, except I think this is actually a little bit more impressive because Georgia is a top-tier program with, in my mind, the nation's best head coach in Kirby Smart, at least for now. And if he isn't that, which I have a hard time seeing myself viewing anyone else as number one until maybe next year, when maybe Ryan Day wins 2 titles, or Steve Sarkisian wins 2 titles, or heck, maybe Marcus Freeman wins 2 titles, maybe even James Franklin wins 2 titles. Regardless of that, Notre Dame finally punched above their weight class. They have not done that in decades. They have not punched above their weight class in eons. They did it tonight. at the time of this recording. So I'm happy for Notre Dame. And for Georgia, it's simple. Your starting quarterback got dinged up, declared for the NFL after that because he was out for the rest of the year. You've had roster limitations at wide receiver that you just haven't figured out. And the number one strength of schedule in the country, strength of schedule has a curve to it where the tougher schedule you play, you'll benefit from it a lot of the times because you understand what it's like to play good teams and you learn from it. You become more battle-tested and honed in. And that's kind of, the curve rising. But then the strength of schedule becomes so difficult that injuries begin to pile up. And now you're not gaining experience, you're losing experience because you have so many injuries that you now have to play. You have to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into your depth chart. And also on top of that, Georgia doesn't have an alien player. They don't. And consequentially, with all their injuries, everything has to go right in almost every game to win. Think of Texas twice. Think of Georgia Tech, monstrous comeback win. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough here because Notre Dame is better than Georgia Tech. And Notre Dame is a team that I think is more aggressive than Texas in a way that matches up better with Georgia, like the special teams play, for example, the kick return for a touchdown, the getting Georgia to jump off sides in that 4th and 1 with that kind of punt trickery that Marcus Freeman pulled, which was absolutely brilliant. And also, Georgia can run, Notre Dame can run the football on even a team like Georgia. Texas struggles to run the football on everyone, especially a team like Georgia. So, therefore, Notre Dame was better able to control the game and kind of dictate the pace, and that combined with, Gunnar Stockton playing instead of Carson Beck and just his lack of experience threw everything off just enough for Notre Dame to take advantage. Before we continue with this, I do want to remind you all to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like the video to help us get into the algorithm. Hitting that bell is very important, the notification bell. Just takes a second, just takes a click. So that way you can get notified when we go live and release new content here on College Football with Sam. I also want you, if you don't mind, to comment your thoughts on this game down below. And by doing so, you'll enter yourself into my giveaway. 2 winners of the giveaway. There will be 4 in total. 2 of them are announced at each halftime of the semifinal games. The winnings are a $20 Visa gift card and a $20 gift card to my merchandise store. So by commenting down below, you've officially entered the lottery. But reply to these 2 questions that I have for you. What changes do you think Kirby Smart needs to make at Georgia, if any? And number 2, is Marcus Freeman a top 10 head coach? I will give you the answer to one of those definitively. I don't often like to do these to the questions I ask you immediately, but I will say I think after tonight, Marcus Freeman's a top 10 head coach. When I saw that trickery he pulled, I kind of thought to myself, slowly I'm frowning because I picked Georgia to win and I want to be right. But the more I think about it, I kind of smile and the grin grows because I think, finally, there's no more reason to doubt. There's been a lot of back and forth with Marcus Freeman, a lot of back and forth. And also, before I finish this thought, if you want to support the channel monetarily and also join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7, we'd love to have Georgia and Notre Dame fans there. Just look in the links in the pinned comment or description, and you'll find what you need. But finally, with all the back and forth about Marcus Freeman, losing to NIU, losing to Marshall, losing to Clemson last year, getting humiliated, outcoached, coached to death by Jeff Brom, losing to Ohio State 2 years in a row, which I don't blame him for that at all, but that just kind of added on to the pressure of, let's say he beat Ohio State both of those years and lost to Marshall and NIU. Well, after those losses, there'd still be a different thought process. There would, because, well, at least we know we can beat the big teams. Before today, it was kind of an unknown. I think before Indiana especially. I thought after the Indiana game, yeah, he's a good coach. But today, confirmed to me, he's a great coach. In fact, might even be near elite. He might be an elite head coach, and we just don't know it yet. which is understandable because those NIU losses and Marshall losses, they should stain the jacket. Those are bad losses, but that doesn't mean the stains will be there forever. This win washes those losses just a bit. This is a big win for recruiting, for resource gathering, for engagement, for Notre Dame's blue blood status and history, for Marcus Freeman's resume, for the lives and experiences of his players and coaches and himself on the staff. They punked Georgia. They did. I mean, think about it this way. Georgia outgained Notre Dame. If I tell you that Georgia outgains Notre Dame 296 to 244 in terms of yards, and if I tell you that Notre Dame on top of that averages 4.2 yards per carry on 37 carries and 3.8 yards per pass attempt, you probably feel good about Georgia winning. You probably do. Especially if I then tell you that Georgia averages 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Then you probably feel a little bit better. But then I tell you that Notre Dame returned a kickoff for a touchdown. I tell you that Georgia only averaged 2.1 yards per carry. And that's a little bit deceiving because a lot of that's, based in sacks. Notre Dame had 4 sacks for gobs of lost yardage. Georgia had only one TFL, but Georgia, for a large part of the game, actually won the line of scrimmage. I think it was later in the game where Notre Dame began to win that battle. But for 3 quarters, Georgia, their D-line was winning, their O-line was winning, but Notre Dame had the better skill players. They had the better backfield on both offense and defense, and the better special teams unit, and the better quarterback, and the better coaching staff. The only edge that Georgia had in the game was a trench advantage, and because Notre Dame's O-line and D-line aren't horrible, they're just, I would say a little bit below on each side of the ball Georgia's level. Well, eventually the trenches just didn't matter. Eventually, things just snowballed, got out of control. The special teams errors, the turnovers, that all went Notre Dame's way because they were the more disciplined team. They weren't as sloppy. Notre Dame tackled better. Notre Dame got more yards after contact. They were straight up the better team. They were the more complete team. Bless me. The more talented team. The, dare I say it, this season, the better developed team. They have great strength and conditioning up there, Notre Dame does. And Mike Denbrock entering this year knew that he would have one of the best offensive staffs in the country because of who he is, and he might be the nation's best offensive coordinator. For Al Golden, I got to give him his flowers. I've never really viewed Al Golden as an elite defensive coordinator or that he's had an elite defensive staff, but it's clear that they do. I mean, yes, they have not faced an offense like Ohio State's or even Texas's. Heck, Penn State's probably the best offense they are going to play by a mile in terms of completeness and talent and matchup advantages that they faced all season long. But what they've done for now 14 games is great. It's honestly very impressive on defense. So Marcus Freeman, whether it's that play where he got Georgia to jump off sides, whether it was his decision to go for it multiple times and stick to his identity, whether it was the special teams as the year progressed got better. I mean, Mitch Jeter, 3 of 3 on field goals from all of them, I think, were over 40 yards in this game. James Rendell punted for over 40 yards per attempt, whether it was the running backs staying strong, an offensive line and defensive lines full of injuries, playing well, true freshmen playing well in certain spots, young guys. He's developing well. He's coaching well. He's an effective CEO. He commands a great organization. It was the wise move for Notre Dame to extend him before that Notre Dame game. Very wise move by them. Leonard, by the way, finished with a 70.8 QBR, only averaged 3.8 yards per pass attempt. He averaged 5.7 yards per run attempt on the ground, though. There's just a good game plan by Mike Denbrock running him up the middle. Georgia's defense has struggled for much of the year defending quarterbacks who can scramble. As for Georgia, just a few thoughts on them. Gunnar Stockton looked really good out of the gate, At one point, he was, I think, 7 of 8 for over 100 yards at some point. But as the game went on, Notre Dame slowly figured him out. And also, I think that a little bit of the heat wore off because he isn't an experienced player. He is a young player. And once again, Georgia had multiple drops in this game from their wide receivers. They couldn't run the ball, even though their offensive line was constantly getting to the second level in blocking. There's a lot of skill position issues at Georgia. There just is. And I think that Kirby Smart they need not just better players on offense. And I think a lot of that will come with recruiting because they're recruiting well everywhere, especially on defense. But I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why Stockton was rated as high as he was at a high school. I think he's going to be a good player in the future. I think that he needs a Todd Monken type offensive coordinator. I mean, I think that Monken was a big part of his 2021 and 2022 championships, and a lot of Monken's influence carried over to the 2023 Georgia team. This year's Georgia offense always starts slow, and I think in large part because of the talent they have, especially in the trenches and how their defense works, they get hot toward the end of the games. I mean, they were top 10 in the country entering this game in fourth quarter points per game because they'd get down early and then they would storm back in the second half. But against a team like Notre Dame, you're better off just starting hot because Notre Dame is perfectly content just kind of sitting on you and, forcing you to come back and forcing you to get out of your identity and be uncomfortable. So what a win for Marcus Freeman. What a win for Notre Dame. Program-changing win. Marcus Freeman, this is just for you Notre Dame fans, and also because I don't like Brian Kelly. Marcus Freeman's better than Brian Kelly. He's better, and it might be by a mile right now. He's operating with, by recruiting ratings, less talented roster, less talented operation than what Kelly has. Kelly is 9-4, 4 losses in 2 of his 3 seasons at LSU. Doesn't look like they're going to win a title anytime soon. Notre Dame could win a national title right now. So kudos to the Irish. And for Georgia, Kirby Smart's still the best head coach in the nation. If he would have simply won this game and maybe the next, this would have been the best head coaching job, I think, of his entire career. Very much so. It's similar to Ryan Day, who I think, he beats Texas. Definitely, if he wins it all, best head coaching job of his career, year to year, just because of the injuries they've dealt with, some of the, I think, poor position coaching, Georgia's wide receivers, and just some issues there. The tough schedule they've played for Ohio State, the tough schedule they've played, some of the issues that didn't come up in the Rose Bowl, but came up in many other games on the O-line or the D-line, not always performing to their ceiling, special teams errors, so on and so forth. I still think Kirby Smart's an elite head coach and commanding one of the best, if not the best program in all of college football. This is a down year for Georgia. They will rebound from this. They will rise again from this. So final score of the game, 23-10, Notre Dame, who punked Georgia, did to Georgia what Georgia does to many other football teams. So that's that right there. We'll talk about Illinois beating South Carolina. Then it's Rose Bowl time. And then some other topics, of course. But I am going to go quickly. I hate to do this, but my beard is really, really bothering me. And I'm thirsty. So I'm going to quickly go get a drink of water. And we'll be right back. While I am away, I want you to answer the poll, if you haven't already, who's going to win the national championship. And also let me know down below some teams who you think will make the college football playoff next year. They can already make it this year. It's not an elimination game. But let me know very early some teams who you think will make the college football playoff. Especially highlight the ones who you think will make it that didn't make it this season. I'll be right back, guys. All right, we're back. Thank you all so much for staying on here. Still got a pretty good amount of concurrent viewers. Let me look at the chat here. Sam, I know you picked Oregon. Are you analyzing the Oregon butt game? Yes, I just saved it for later in the video. Sam, you always disparage Ohio State's strength and conditioning program, and now the Tennessee and Oregon players go down to injury against the Buckeyes. You say nothing. Oh, come on. Come on. So we're just... Hold on a second. We're going to get to the Oregon Buckeyes game. So just one game in the Rose Bowl is enough for us to ignore a ton of disparities that have happened. Come on. That's we can't do that, guys. We can't do that. Ohio State's playing unreal. They're going to win it all. But we cannot act like we haven't seen these same things come up over and over and over and over and over again. This has been a recurring thing for like 3 years in a row now, where Ohio State like just straight up gets out physical. There has a lot of key injuries that go down. And I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I think their strength and conditioning program is better than I thought it was after that Rose Bowl game. It's the same thing with my view of Justin Fry and Larry Johnson. But what I don't want to do is overreact and say, oh, Ohio State's strength and conditioning is elite. And then, like, let's say maybe Texas gets 10 TFLs and runs for somehow 3 yards per carry. That's my point. And the thing with the Tennessee game, too, is the Tennessee and Oregon games were different. What Ohio State did in the Oregon game was unreal. What they did to Tennessee was also very impressive for a quarter, but Tennessee had almost 10 TFLs, and Ohio State's O-line didn't play well against Tennessee in run blocking. Pass blocking, yeah. The entire O-line played well in the Rose Bowl. It's just the point that it's in the playoff, and that's good, but I have a feeling it's something else besides, I don't know, elite strength and conditioning. Like, take this for example. Jeremiah Smith is an alien. He was an alien out of high school. Do we think that him having the day he did against Oregon is because Ohio State has the best strength and conditioning program in the country? Or do we think it's because he's insane and Ryan Day knows how to scheme an elite offense and has done this in the playoffs over and over and over again, and this season things are clicking? And it's a credit to him, and it's a credit to Kelly, and a credit to Knowles. They may not be elite, but they were never as bad as you made them out to be. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm wrong on certain things for sure. But I just think that, I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about it. The point that I'm trying to make in all of this, of course, is that, I don't know. It's like the Oregon game, that game against Oregon where, yes, the strength and conditioning finally worked. The D-line and O-line finally came together. Maybe they'll keep doing this. Maybe they'll just kick everyone's butt and win a national championship. But it's insane. We can't just flip the switch. We can't do that. We have to adjust and tweak things. We can't go from one extreme to the other. So I've been very critical, yes, of the strength and conditioning, the O-line and the D-line. And the minute my faith in them was a little bit restored in November, the Michigan game happened, where Michigan just looked like the fresher team and the more conditioned team. Just didn't have the same athletes. So that's just my opinion. And thank you for liking the channel. You know, the good thing about college football with Samson, is you and I can disagree, and I'm not going to block you. I'm not going to hate you. I'm not going to kick you off here. That's not what's going to happen. We can agree to disagree on certain things, and I will, again, like I've said, my opinions change. I adjust to new information. You know, my predictions this year have been rough at times. But when I react and when I give analysis, I give you my thoughts. I tell you I'm wrong. I let you know what happened on the field, what I saw, what the film says. And I think that combined makes this channel the best college football channel on YouTube, because I don't tell you if you're a Penn State or Ohio State fan like Joel Klatt does, that you need to suck it up and accept big noon kickoffs. I don't blame my incorrect predictions on the model. I just admit that I'm wrong. So, just overall, I think that with Ohio State, here's the thing. I still think they'd benefit from changing their roster management, so Petone out. I think they'd benefit from Mickey Marotti leaving. I think they'd benefit from new O-line and D-line coaches. But those are 4 coaches. And those 4 coaches are 4 coaches out of several analysts and several position coaches. Like, I think Laurinaitis is an elite position coach. I think that Walton is an elite corners coach. I think that Knowles is one of the best D coordinators in the country. I think that when you look at Brian Hartline, easily the best wide receiver coach in the country. When you look at recruiting and development, I think that Hartline overall is maybe the best position coach in all of the sport. Carlos Laughlin's an awesome running backs coach. His time at Oregon tells us that. Same with what I think he's done to Henderson this year, where Henderson's a lot better at blocking. And Chip Kelly, I think that Chip Kelly is a bit up and down at times, but he's been great in the playoffs. He still has buzz. I think he's done a good job of coaching Howard, maybe even more so than calling the plays. And Day's an offensive genius. He is. And I think that he is a very tactical coach. When Day is not emotional, good things happen. By emotional, of course, I mean not in the fired up way. I kind of view that as like adrenaline rush. Like, that's not sad or happy, that's just intensity. When Day is emotional, bad things happen. But when he's intense, when he's focused, when he can just be intense and there's not much pressure on his shoulders, or the pressure's just there so he can't change anything, he's on fire. I mean, I'll talk about it here. He's 4-2 against the spread in his 6 playoff games. And the 2 times he didn't cover were against teams that had a combined record of 27-1. So make from that what you will. I think that anyone, even if Ryan Day loses to Texas in the Cotton Bowl, there's no way you can fire him. That'd be a disastrous mistake to fire Day. Again, even if they lose to Texas in the Cotton Bowl, which at that point, the season would be a failure. Texas can beat Ohio State. I don't think they will, and I'll talk about that in the next 48 hours when we do our preview for the semifinal games. But what more can you ask for? 34-0 is insanity. To act like this is the year, and if he doesn't do it this year, he never will, is kind of bonkers. If he can produce in a semifinal game, 34-0, and I promise you, if Ohio State doesn't win at all, this opinion of mine will not change. To get that big of a lead with the talent he has and some of the limitations that Ohio State's had on their roster, he can do it. He can win it all, and he will, even if he doesn't get it done this year with that performance. That much has given me confidence. But anyway, let's talk about Illinois beating South Carolina. Then we'll get to the Rose Bowl, and then we'll get to some topics about the Big Ten teams remaining in the playoff and also Oregon, because I think that we can't take away from what Oregon did this year. Yes, Ohio State clobbered them. Ohio State showed that they were the better team. But guess what Oregon did? Oregon... Bless me, that was a really delicious pasta meal that I cooked. It was a cream sauce with pasta. Didn't know if you guys needed to know that. But anyway, landing in Oregon like coached circles around Ohio State in that first game. So Oregon didn't have a terrible year. Like, Ohio State won the game that mattered more. Yes. But keep in mind, that's also only going to hold true if Ohio State wins it all. If Ohio State doesn't win it all, they'll have 3 losses. Oregon will have 1, and Oregon's program trajectory will still be at a higher angle than Ohio State's. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. I want to briefly touch on Illinois beating South Carolina. I want to kick off this video here in this way. Illinois 21, South Carolina 17. And how I want to kick off this video is doing this. Whatever Brett Bielema was doing over at Shane Beamer, just wow, it was. I can't even take myself seriously when I'm doing that. I watched that happen as Brett Bielema again is not flapping his arms, but he's raising his arms doing the substitution sign, and he's looking over at Beamer, and you can tell he's taunting him, and then Beamer just totally loses it. And then it pans to the sideline where Bielema is just smirking, and that smirk is the sign of, oh, I'm in your head now. Like, I'm in your head. That moment right there was, I think, the epitome of Illinois' season when Bielema did that. Illinois is not a kind team. They're not a easygoing team. And they don't make things easy for themselves. They don't just make things hard for their opponents. When I look at Illinois this year, getting blown out by Oregon, blown out by Penn State, though that game was pretty close in terms of score, but Penn State was dominating the whole way. And when I look at the Minnesota loss and the rest of their schedule, I know that they are not one of the 10 best teams in the country. I know that for sure. But then when I look at the 14-point win over Michigan, when I look at the 7-point overtime win over Nebraska, their complete depantsing of Jalen Daniels and Kansas, where they made Jalen Daniels look confused. He didn't know how to read Illinois' defense. When I look at the Rutgers game, where they won on that Hail Mary-esque play, and all these other things, I think to myself, oh, and also the way they beat South Carolina, this team's clutch. This team's well coached. And this team does a pretty good job at getting into their opponents' heads. They did that against Nebraska. They hung around with Nebraska, got in Nebraska's head, started to win the trenches toward the end of the game, and then boom, it was overtime. It was game over, and Illinois won a top 25 matchup. They got in Jalen Daniels' head. They got into Michigan's coaching staff's head. They executed a fake punt that was absolutely brilliant, completely coached circles around Sharon Moore in Michigan, who had a lot more talent, but still beat him by double digits. And I thought that the Fighting Illini, all season long have done their best at multiple points. And you know what the good thing about Illinois is? They're bringing most of their roster back, and they're using the portal quite nicely. For South Carolina, kind of is what it is. Disappointing finish to a season that at one point had college football playoff aspirations, but also it's Shane Beamer's best year ever at South Carolina. It's the best South Carolina season since the Steve Spurrier era. They've recruited at a high level. Lenora Sellers is developing into a star, and I think that while this Citrus Bowl loss has a little bit of a sting to it, at the same time, the future's bright. And before I get into any more of this video, we'll talk about some of the takeaways and the box score, and also how many of Illinois' players are returning here. I inquire you to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, also to hit the notification bell so that you can go live so that you know when I go live and release new content, so you'll get notified of that. Also, comment your thoughts on this game down below, and I want you to answer a few questions for me. Number one, how successful can Brett Bielema be at Illinois, realistically? As in, will this be his most successful season, or do we think that maybe he can go a little bit higher? Maybe attain the status that Wisconsin, let's say, had in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, even preseason of 2021, where Paul Chryst would just beat all the teams that didn't have top 10 or top 15 talent. Because in this new era of football, if Illinois can do that, where they retain most of their roster, don't lose a lot of guys to the portal, they recruit at a decent level, and they coach at a high level, they can maybe reach the playoffs, maybe a year or maybe even more than that now that it's expanded to 12? Let me know down below. And as for South Carolina, what do we think of their program in the long term? Because 9 wins with the schedule they had, I thought was pretty impressive. I know it's pretty impressive. I mean, to look at the Gamecocks losing to Alabama by 2 on the road, losing to Ole Miss by 24, but Ole Miss when they were on in a lot of ways. LSU lost by 3 at home on kind of a controversial call, and then Illinois by 4. All of their losses were by 4 or 3 points outside of the game to Ole Miss. And again, Ole Miss at times this year had kind of a gear like Ohio State has right now, where when everything clicked, they would snowball you and it was game over. And I think that Ohio State, of course, definitely has that. Ole Miss at times had that this season. I think that there are maybe some more teams. I think maybe even all the teams remaining in the playoff have that somewhere, but Ohio State's the only one who showed it consistently. Ole Miss showed it against South Carolina, and they showed it against Georgia. So they showed it twice, but then they had those weird losses, of course. Anyway, we're not talking about Ole Miss here. We're talking about South Carolina and Illinois. And lastly, make sure to comment your thoughts down below and answer those questions, because you'll answer my giveaway. The 4 winners for my giveaway, $20 gift card overall, like for anything, a Visa, and then $20 merchandise store gift card. Those will be announced on my channel, on my live shows for the semifinal games, where I'll do play-by-play and color commentary. 2 of them, January 9th, the other 2, January 10th. And if you want to support the channel, the links to do that and also to join our Discord server are in the pinned comment and the description. But looking at this matchup here, Illinois looked lethal through the air. And also on the ground, you know what I was shocked by? And I was telling my dad this. My dad watches college football. He's a passionate Michigan State fan. And we're talking through this game as we're watching it, and I'm saying Illinois can't run on anyone. Like they literally could not run the football on anyone in Big Ten play. And their pass protection was awful in Big Ten play. Like Altmaier would get sacked 3, 4, 5 times a game, and he has legs. Like imagine if Will Howard got sacked 3 or 4 times a game with his legs, with his ability to maneuver the pocket. Now, I know Illinois has much better skill position players and wide receivers, or Ohio State does have much better skill position and wide receiver players than Illinois, and a better defense. So Will Howard's job is a bit easier. His pass protection O-line is also, of course, much better. Probably same with his run blocking O-line too, definitely. Because Illinois in the regular season, the Big Ten had like the worst, or one of the worst offensive lines in the conference. They were moving. They were moving South Carolina's D-line. A D-line that I thought was one of the best in the country for much of the season. South Carolina only had 1 sack and 3 TFLs. Illinois had 2 sacks and 5 tackles for loss. Gabe Jacas had 3 tackles for loss. Illinois averaged 5.2 yards per carry. Josh McCray had a long of 60, 114 yards, 8.8 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. I know that South Carolina didn't have Raheem Sanders. I think they also had some other opt-outs for sure. I don't think Illinois had many opt-outs at all. I know that Zachary Franklin played. Pat Bryant didn't play in this game. He opted out. And that made it even more impressive that Altmaier was 13 of 22 for 174 yards, a touchdown, a pick, 7.9 yards per carry, and he had an 87.6 QBR. Lenora Sellers had a good game, 24-34, 260, 7.6 yards per attempt, and a touchdown. Really what this game ironically came down to was the fact that Alex Herrera missed a field goal, that Shane Beamer wanted to run a trick special teams play that Illinois defended very well, and that Illinois scored touchdowns. They didn't have to kick field goals. And you look at just some of the box score things here. Illinois was 0 of 1 on 4th down. Yes, but they were 8 of 12 on 3rd down, converting 66%, 66.6% of their their third downs are 66.7% technically of their third down attempts. South Carolina was a bit less successful at 9 of 16, and they were 1 of 3 on fourth down. So they had one additional turnover on downs that made up for the additional Illinois turnover as an interception or fumble. Both of these teams were very close, and that was not exactly shocking to me because I picked Illinois to upset South Carolina. I released that on Twitter. Don't worry, guys. I also picked Alabama to beat Michigan and Baylor to beat LSU. So that's just to show that we're not perfect here. But I did pick this to happen with the thought process of I thought that Bielema was a better coach than Beamer, that his staff in many aspects was better. And I also thought that South Carolina's offense and Sellers was a little bit overvalued, just a tad. And also that South Carolina's D-line is really good. Their secondary, a lot more questionable, and they haven't faced many good passing offenses this year. South Carolina hasn't. I mean, they played Ole Miss, really good when functioning at their peak. LSU's passing offense all year was overrated. They just passed a whole lot, so that's why they had some yards there. And then everyone else outside of maybe Clemson just wasn't all that great. And I just think that, whether it's due to opt-outs or maybe the month to prepare or the things they already mentioned, like coaching, that Illinois was going to take advantage here and win, and they did. That was one of the bowl games I got right. It's very hard to predict bowl games with all the opt-outs and different things, but it was refreshing to see Shane Beamer and Brett Bielema shake hands at the end of the game after their whole kerfuffle, after their whole almost fight that the refs had to corral Beamer for. I still find it funny that Bielema, if you're not watching on screen, just watch if you can. I'm doing the whole substitution pose. I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was absolutely hilarious by Bielema. Of course, not showing of good sportsmanship, and that's something that you want to show as good sportsmanship. But I also thought that was funny because what Illinois was doing in this game that I think also was a coaching genius move by Bielema is he was taking as long as he could with substitutions, and I think it was throwing South Carolina off because South Carolina wanted to substitute, but they also wanted to go fast while substituting. In Illinois, through the substitution rule and also through the fact that they did a much better job on the line of scrimmage than even Vegas. I mean, Vegas had this as the opening line was South Carolina minus 10.5. That meant that, Vegas is kind of thinking here that South Carolina should win this game at the minimum. Maybe not cover, but that they should win. And that right there, the line of scrimmage edge, was something I wasn't expecting. But that, along with Bielema being the better coach, which in my mind I was expecting, combined for a close Illinois win of 21-17. And there we go. That's the last of the bowl games. Now we're moving on to Ohio State and Oregon. Oh, just got to crack the neck. Yeah, Ohio State, guys, they gutted Oregon. Ohio State did. Straight up gutted them. So we're going to talk about that, and then we'll also talk about some other topics with some of these other teams. Bless me. Thank you for your patience. All right. The Ohio State Buckeyes gut the Oregon Ducks. They cooked the Oregon Ducks and then ate them for dinner. Final score of 41-21 Ohio State. That's dominant, but that also doesn't describe how dominant. Because at one point in this matchup, and this is the only statistic you need to know, at one point in this matchup, Ohio State led 34-0. There may be no other game like that in terms of expected performance and expected outcome versus the outcome. There may be no other game we see in college football history when you look at the kickoff to the 2-minute warning to maybe, if you don't want to use the 2-minute warning, to halftime, where the expected outcome, not just from the general public, but even from Vegas, who favored Ohio State to win, favored them by 2.5 points, but not by the 20 points they won by, favored them versus what happened, the expectation versus the reality. The width of those two, I mean, there's a canyon separating that. I predicted Oregon to win, but only by a possession, just by a humble touchdown. I thought to myself that Oregon would once again have some success against Ohio State's defense, that Ohio State would also have success against Oregon's defense, but that ultimately Oregon would be superior in the trenches overall. And they weren't. They were not at all. Ohio State outclassed them in the trenches, but even more importantly than in the trenches, Ohio State just came out better prepared. They changed their scheme. They adapted from the first game. Here's the difference between these two teams. Here's the big difference here. Ohio State learned their lesson. They took the punch, they adapted, and they just moved on. Oregon came out thinking they could do the same thing over and over again that they did the first time, and it didn't work. And that right there is coaching. Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, Chip Kelly did a much better job than Dan Lanning, Will Stein, and Tosh Lupoy at preparing their team for success. Period. That's it. And I think that explains a lot of the lopsidedness here. On top of the fact that now I've learned, and anyone else who hasn't, well, they should learn pretty quickly, or they have after this matchup, that Ohio State is the more talented team. They have the higher ceiling. And they played in part because of coaching, but also the individual effort of the players to their ceiling. So everything went Ohio State's way. And Ohio State controlled all the controllables. And Oregon, well, they didn't control any of the controllables. So that's why the 34-0 lead occurred. And it was just, that was impressive to me. The Tennessee win could have been explained away by just Tennessee being very overvalued, because I still think Tennessee's very overrated. But this game, this was way more impressive than anything Ohio State did against Tennessee. Much more impressive. So kudos to Ryan Day, his staff, to Brian Hartline, to Justin Fry, to Larry Johnson, to James Laurinaitis, to Tim Walton, to whatever low-level analyst is working with the special teams, because they don't have a special teams coordinator, and yet the special teams did very well. I mean, Jaden Fielding was an accurate field goal kicker. Ohio State had, all right punting. So take from that what you will. But before we get into any more of this game, and I know long-winded introduction, but I think it's important, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and also comment your thoughts down below, but most importantly, hit the notification bell. That way you get notified when I go live or release new content. Answer these questions down below. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that Ohio State wins the national championship? Number 2, how flukish do you think this game was? Because on one hand of the spectrum, I think that Oregon beating Ohio State the way they did the first time, that was maybe one extreme. But I also get the sense that this was another extreme, and that the true median outcome of like Ohio State and Oregon facing off is probably Ohio State winning by a touchdown, or maybe by 10 points. That's kind of my feeling around this game. Not saying it's flukish, though, that this was anything but a fluke, but flukish in the sense of the 34-0. How trying to find the word here. Can that be replicated? Like against Texas, or against whoever Ohio State plays in the national championship if they beat Texas? What do you think about that? Tell me that down in the comment section below. And also, what changes do you think Oregon needs to make? Do you think they need to be serious coaching changes, roster changes, in-house changes? Or do you think they just got punked? Sometimes the elite teams, the good teams, sometimes they just come out and get destroyed like that. It's rare, but it's happened before. So let me know what you think Oregon needs to change down in the comment section below. By commenting, you'll enter our giveaway. The announcement to that will take place January 9th and 10th. 2 of the giveaway winners will be announced at halftime of the Cotton Bowl. The other 2 at the halftime of the Orange Bowl. We'll be going live and doing play-by-play and color commentary. So you'll enter that giveaway. $40 total, 20 for my merchandise store gift card there, and 20 for a Visa card overall. Just wanted to let you guys know that. And also, if you want to support the channel, just look in the pinned comment and the description, and you'll find different ways to support the channel, and also the link to join our Discord server. But enough of that. Let's talk about this game, the Rose Bowl. Again, the final score: Oregon 21, Ohio State 41. The impact statistic here is that Ohio State had 8 sacks and 13 TFLs. I tell you that before the game. Someone tells me that before the game. I know, okay, Ohio State's blowing this team out. And they only allowed 3 TFLs. And, PFF didn't give Ohio State's O-line that impressive of a grade, and I believe it. I mean, I've been a critic of Justin Fry. I still think even after this game that Ohio State would benefit moving on from Justin Fry. My opinion of him has improved, but it is one game, and a game where Oregon, look, they defended the inside run all right. The problem is Ohio State didn't run to the inside all that much because they, made better decisions. They thought, wait, hold on a minute. We've been trying to run up the middle all year, and it really hasn't been working out, especially after Simmons went down, especially after McLaughlin went down. What if with Travion Henderson, who has 4.4, 4.3 speed, what if we ran like a stretch play? What if we did that? What if we, tried zone blocking and running to the outside instead of trying to just man ball our way through everything and prove how tough we are? What if we were actually tough, not just trying to prove it? I think that's a big difference with Ohio State's coaching, and it paid huge dividends here. 8 sacks, many of them were coverage sacks. Ohio State dominated Oregon in the trenches, but there were also moments where Oregon was holding their own water, not just with holds, but some plays where they were legitimately, protecting Gabriel well. But Gabriel, even when he had forever in the pocket, would take a sack because the coverage downfield was just so elite. He couldn't do anything. The whole operation for Ohio State was a coaching clinic. One of the best coaching jobs in an individual game that I have ever witnessed. Straight up. It was very impressive. That's the impact statistic right there. I tell you, Ohio State has 8 sacks. You know they're winning. 13 TFLs, it's the same thing. I tell you, Ohio State only allows 3 TFLs. It's not as clear, but still, given the fact that Jordan Birch returned and this Oregon defense does have legitimate playmakers on the D-line, you probably think to yourself, yeah, I'm a little bit more confident in Ohio State after knowing that. So when Ohio State dominates you in the trenches, you get dominated because that is their weakness. They have no weaknesses at wide receiver. They have no weakness at safety. Cody Simon's a beast. It's been the O-line and to a much lesser degree the D-line and tight end that have been questionable all season long. And when those position groups get you, there's no hope for you. You're dead. You'll get blown out by this Ohio State team. So we'll talk about Ohio State, but I want to breeze through Oregon here and talk about them because there are conversations to be had about the Ducks. I think that this week didn't prove this, but gave some credibility to it, a lot of credibility. The buys, contrary to my belief, and this was a part of the reason why I picked Oregon, so it also explains part of the reason why I'm wrong, the buys are not beneficial. They aren't. Now, maybe to the best coaching staff in the universe, they could be. But at the same time, when you're off for a month and you're facing a team who's played at home and won at home and is just as talented as you, they get to shake off some of that rust. They do. And many of you viewers mentioned that. So kudos to you. You deserve a cookie. Seriously. Not just a cookie, like a whole basket of the most delicious cookies that you would ever want. Or maybe if you're not a cookie guy and dessert for you is like a burger, or maybe you're a vegetarian, like whatever food you love, you deserve to have that because you guys called that. Part of the reason why this game was so lopsided is Oregon came out rusty and Ohio State was on fire. Now, I think a lot of that rust had to do with the fact that Oregon coached this game arrogantly. They clearly thought they were going to be able to do the same things. And I thought to myself that they weren't going to be able to do the exact same things. I thought they would have to be more consistent. They were going to have to use the short passing game more, the intermediate passing game more. They weren't going to get the same explosives deep over and over and over and over again because Jim Knowles had made adjustments. And while I thought maybe Oregon would get an explosive here or two, and indeed they did, I thought that Ohio State's defense would adjust and at least hold Oregon to a little more accountability, hold them a little bit more accountable than they did the first time around. I think what happened, as I mentioned earlier, is Oregon thought they could do the same thing again. It was weird. I mean, they were trying to establish the run when it clearly wasn't working. And Jim Knowles, in the same flipping way, it was an inverse of the first game with Oregon's offense and Ohio State's defense. The first time around, Will Stein outcoached Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles didn't know what he was doing. Jim Knowles may have well as been on a bench waiting for the train, and he smells of alcohol. He didn't know what he was doing first time around. And Will Stein was putting on a coaching clinic in coaching circles around him. This time, Will Stein is waiting for the train, smelling of alcohol, on the bench, and Jim Knowles is in the suit. He's, tightening up his tie. He smells really good, and he's the man, and he's doing whatever he wants. And on top of that, while Oregon's offense and Ohio State's defense had completely flipped in terms of which was dominating the other, nothing had changed from the side of Ohio State's offense versus Oregon's defense. Very little. There were, of course, things that were different, like the fact that Ohio State had a lot more success going deep. But again, I think part of that was also on Oregon and their lack of preparation. Regardless of that, Ohio State's offense hummed because they made the appropriate adjustments. Ohio State's defense rebounded because they made the appropriate adjustments. Oregon already had the inferior roster, so therefore you have to out-coach Ohio State in order to beat them. You can't just coach at the same level they do and beat them, because then the talent's the tiebreaker, and that leans OSU. You have to out-coach Ohio State. And instead what happened is Ohio State rolled over Oregon like a tank rolling over a dead body on the battlefield. And it was just over. I mean, the game was over midway through the second quarter. And we're talking about the number one team. We're talking about two teams who were top 5, if not top 4. I mean, in hindsight, Oregon was very overvalued by me, by others. I know that even people I knew who strongly picked Ohio State did not think, oh my gosh, this would happen. But here we are. So it was just a very impressive showing by Ohio State. And I know I'm talking about Ohio State when I'm supposed to talk about Oregon, but how can't I talk about Ohio State? It was an absolute dominant performance. Oregon had no scores on the first 6 drives, and they had negative 23 rushing yards. They were boat raced and clearly unprepared. They were rusty. They had a moment there in the third quarter where it looked like they might come back, but again, circling back to game planning, preparation, being warmed up, they didn't have enough of those things to mount said comeback. They didn't. And also, speaking of the coaching, I've never been high on Tosh Lupoy. I wasn't even high on him this year. Part of the reason why I picked Oregon incorrectly is because I thought that Ohio State had offensive elements that were just broken beyond repair, namely the offensive line. Now, I was incorrect on that with the O-line, but we'll talk more about Ohio State later, because the O-line for Ohio State is still far from a strength. I just think they managed it a lot better, and they, for all the talk about Fry's lack of recruiting, which is true, that's only been really the past 2 years. They have enough bodies with enough experience to where they're not just going to roll over and die there like Colorado's offensive line in 2023. So, again, we'll get to that later. But Tosh Lupoy holds Oregon back. He was the worst coordinator on the field that day. Straight up. Far inferior to Jim Knowles, far inferior to Will Stein, inferior to Chip Kelly. I mean, they panned over to him, and he looks lost. I mean, Lanning looked lost. Stein kind of looked calm the whole day, but Lupoy looked lost. Lanning actually didn't look lost. Lanning just looked disheartened, like, oh my gosh, we're seriously losing to these guys who we beat, and they're kicking our you-know-what? But Lupoy holds Oregon back. Oregon would benefit. They would, in fact, I'll say this, even though Oregon loses a lot of production this year, they'll be better next year if they just get a better D coordinator, even with all they lose, because they're recruiting at a high enough level, developing at a high enough level, and coaching at a high enough level at multiple positions, assistant coaching-wise, offensive coordinator-wise, and head coaching-wise, to where I think they will improve next year, even with all their losses, if they simply get a better defensive coordinator. In games against playoff teams, Boise State, Ohio State twice, Penn State once, they have allowed 35 points per game. 5 touchdowns per game against playoff teams on an average basis. Could have been even more if Ohio State kept their foot on the gas. Could have been even more if James Franklin didn't James Franklin in the Big Ten championship game. In hindsight, yeah, this defense, personnel-wise, I think personnel-wise, this defense is actually pretty good. They don't have the same personnel that Ohio State does, or Penn State does, or Texas does, or Notre Dame, or any of the remaining playoff teams, or many of the teams in the CFP. But their defensive personnel is pretty good. I mean, they're a little bit small at DB, but they have athleticism, they have speed, and if they were put in better positions, they would have done better in this game. They're tough at linebacker, and they're big, athletic, and fast on the D-line. They're not perfect. They don't have the best defensive roster in the country, or now they certainly don't even have the best overall roster in the country. But scheme for them is a lot more of a problem than personnel. And with how they're recruiting, the personnel, I think, will eventually solve itself. Same with their strength and conditioning. Same with Lanning's background. Lupoy needs to go. He does. He absolutely does. Now, whether that will happen, I'm unsure. But he needs to go, for sure. And I'll leave it at that. And last but not least, and I want to emphasize this, because Oregon is 13-1. They're 9-0. They were the best team in the Big Ten in the regular season in terms of achievement, in terms of strength of record. They were the number 1 seed in the playoffs, and they hold the Big Ten's best recruiting class, especially when you factor in the portal. They had a great season. I mean, Ohio State's the best program in the Big Ten in terms of blue blood status. They are. And in terms of 21st century success, they're the best. And they have been recently the favorite every year, even though they haven't won the Big Ten in 4 years now. They've been the favorites because, well, they have a great coach in Day, an elite coach, who at worst has been a near elite coach. They have a good operation overall. They recruit well. They send guys to the NFL. And Lanning beat them. He beat them. Even when Ohio State was favored to win that game. And he didn't lose to Michigan like Ohio State did, for example. And again, Ohio State won the game that mattered more, at least as long as they win it all. And I think that right now, Day has to be viewed after that win for now as a better coach than Lanning. Just does with what he did. And at the same time, Oregon had a great season. I mean, Garrison, Scarlet and Blue Show, Scarlet and Blue podcast. Check them out on YouTube. I've had Garrison on the channel before. He had high praise for Oregon. He's like, in all seriousness, I've been trolling Oregon fans about how we won the game that mattered, but the regular season matters too. And it does. Why do you think Oregon stole some recruits that Ohio State had? Some of it was the money, but I bet you another part of it was Oregon looked like the better program in the regular season. Oregon was the better coached team in the regular season. And that's even more apparent now when you factor in that Ohio State, the game they played here, Ohio State finally played to their ceiling, and they blew out Oregon. Now, credit Oregon didn't play to their ceiling, but still, Ohio State is the better roster. They're the better team. And then you compare these teams in the regular season, you think to yourself, wow, like in hindsight, Oregon really was maybe even punching above their weight class there. And Ohio State definitely wasn't. So they had a good season, the Ducks did, and they need to make changes for sure, upgrades to be specific. But I don't think that Rose Bowl game should tell you that Lanning is overrated. because Nick Saban's got blown out before. Clemson in 18 got destroyed by Utah his second year there in 2008. He had 3 losses at Alabama's 4th year there when they brought a ton of players back. He's gotten, destroyed not just by Clemson, but like Georgia didn't destroy them by the scoreboard, but Georgia dominated them in that 2021 national championship game. They got handily beaten by Texas in 23. Michigan played like the worst game of their season in 23 and beat Alabama. Like, great coaches lose games that seem like layups, or they get destroyed by great opponents. It happens. It's happened to Ryan Day before. Look at 2020 Alabama or 2021 Michigan. And I feel like for Lanning, that was his 2020-2021 Ryan Day moment, was the Rose Bowl, where you know you have a good operation and you are really this close, but then you match up against a team who's found some of your weaknesses and they just exploit them to death, and there's no way you're winning that game. That was the Alabama game and the Michigan game in 2020 and 2021 for Dan Lanning, I think. And if you're Dan Lanning, what you want to do is you want to make the move now. You don't want to do, and maybe this will be rectified at the end of this year, maybe this won't even matter, but you don't want to do in some areas what Day did after 2021, where you wait to fire Parker Fleming until after 2023. You don't want to do that. You want to make the necessary changes now. Don't get to a point where Day played Michigan in 23 and it didn't matter that he called a great game. Michigan was just better, so they were going to win. Don't do that. If you're Lanning, make the necessary adjustments and just do them now. Ohio State fans who are probably eagerly watching the show will tell you that. Just make your necessary adjustments now. And they will also say that Oregon had a great season. That's why they're so ecstatic that they beat Oregon, because Oregon was the number 1 seed. There was an argument for Oregon to be the best team in the country, and it was just the fact that they were peaking at the right time and started the season low as to why they weren't analytically uber dominant, because they weren't ranked as high by FPI and these other power ratings as Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas. Ironically enough, Oregon's now ranked below Penn State in FPI, which is just funny. And I also get it, because I think that I even said this after the Big Ten championship game, that I thought that Penn State may have had the better roster than Oregon and just lost due to coaching. I think that opinion of mine was totally vindicated and defended by what happened in the Rose Bowl. It was just that the fact that Dan Lanning's that much better of a coach than James Franklin. So even though Franklin had the better roster equipped for success in the Big Ten, and I'd say even success nationally, because I don't think Ohio State would go up 34-0 on Penn State. Just my opinion. Maybe they would have, but I don't think so. So, yeah. But that's a little bit of rambling anyway. What I really want to do is discuss something that I've discovered. I've discovered that Ryan Day overachieves in the college football playoff. And I know that because he's 3-3 in CFP games. He's beaten the number 1 team once. He has beaten the number 2 team once. And he's beaten the 9th team once. So he's beaten all teams who were ranked in the top 10 seeding wise. None of these teams were all of them were SEC or Big Ten teams, except for Clemson in 2020, who basically was like an SEC team in terms of talent. And he's 4-2 against the spread. And ever since that blowout loss to Bama in the championship game, he has been 3-0 against the spread in the playoffs. We've talked about multiple times on this channel how if Day just, executed that fake punt a little earlier against Georgia in the Peach Bowl, or if Ruggles made that field goal, his seat would be totally cool right now. His tenure would be looked upon much differently. And I think that something that I should have saw, and I didn't, and it's my fault, I was wrong, is that Ryan Day, for all the crap that he gets, and some of it is correct, but I've largely been a Day defender, so I will take credit there, is this guy overperforms in the playoffs. Like, this team performs at their peak in the postseason, in the playoffs. Of course, Cotton Bowl aside, that wasn't a playoff game. I don't think the team wanted to be there, mainly because I don't think Day wanted to be there. I thought Day thought that was maybe beneath Ohio State a bit, which I don't know if that's a problem. I mean, part of me thinks that is, but then again, that's last year, and Ohio State's in a position to win it all right now. And I think Day's a great guy. I think Day's a high character guy. I think that Day is, I've already said it, but like a good person. On top of that, he's a good coach. He's a good schemer. He's an offensive mastermind. The players want to play for him. And his 3 losses in the playoffs were to teams that had a combined record. Listen to this, a combined record of 42-1. 22 Georgia, 15-0. 20 Bama, 13-0. It's 28-0. And then 19 Clemson, 14-1. Day's 3 losses in the playoffs were to teams that had a combined record of 42-1. That is a average win percentage of 98%, rounded to the 100th place. That's insane. And keep in mind, let me tell you the quarterbacks he lost to. College Trevor Lawrence, college Mac Jones, college Stetson Bennett. That's 2 Hall of Famers right there. And Jones set the record that season for college football passer rating. So just keeping those things in mind. Also, he didn't have Jim Knowles in year 2 or year 3, so he didn't have generationally efficient defenses, although the 19 defense with Hafley was very close to that, if not that. They allowed, I think, around 13, 14 points per game, but also college football games back then were higher scoring than they were in 23 or 24 due to the new clock rules, the fact that the Meadow was, kind of going up tempo there and having as much drives as possible, whereas now, even if you didn't factor in the clock rules, the games slowed down a bit. Just straight up, Day overachieves in the playoffs. It's a common theme. It's something that I'm going to put on my board now as kind of like an exception to the rule, where Ohio State, whether it's 22, whether it's 20, whether it is 2024, and I think it would have been this case last year. I think if Ohio State played in the playoffs last season, if they snuck in as that 4th seed, they would have rematched with Michigan in the title. They would have beaten whoever was in front of them to rematch with Michigan in the national championship. Same thing in 21, by the way. If they played Georgia in 2021 in the same setting that Bama did, they probably beat Georgia, given the matchup edges, the fact that, those amazing wide receivers against a questionable Georgia secondary would have went in Ohio State's favor. Maybe that's too bold of an opinion of mine, but Alabama did it with an inferior passing game and a Pete Golding defense that had some questions. So I just think Day overachieves in the playoffs. He knows what to do in the playoffs to have success. And to get to some other points here, Jeremiah Smith's an alien. This one will be very brief because, well, we already have known for weeks now, if not since before then, that he was an alien. I had him as an All-American caliber receiver. I think he was, to be exact, in the preseason, I had him as the 8th best receiver in college football. I think. Definitely top 10. Well, he's number 1. And he's already better than any Heartline receiver ever. After that Rose Bowl game, it's clear to me he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr. I just think that Marvin Harrison Jr. had a stronger connection with Kyle McCord than Jeremiah Smith does with Will Howard. In terms of not chemistry, but in terms of like Will Howard doesn't rely on Smith as much as McCord did on Marvin Harrison Jr. But that also could be the fact that Ibuka is healthy this year, and he wasn't healthy for all of the games last season. But Jeremiah Smith's the best wide receiver to step foot at Ohio State, to step foot in Ohio State, definitely under Ryan Day. I'd say the same under Urban Meyer. I think he's going to be the best Ohio State wide receiver ever, if he isn't on track to being that already. He has 1,224 receiving yards. He averages 17.5 yards per reception. By the way, he's not averaging that with Joe Burrow. Like, no disrespect to Will Howard, who is a top 2 quarterback in the country right now, but he's not averaging those numbers with the best NFL, with like one of the best NFL QBs in the country. He's just doing that because that's who he is. And that's not, again, disrespectful to Will Howard. It's me trying to categorize Smith in his own category because that's where he is. And he has 14 receiving touchdowns. Again, keep in mind, 14 games. He still has 2 more games left, potentially. I would favor them to beat Texas right now, the Buckeyes, but you do never know. And Texas has some things that I think they could throw at Ohio State. But still, I think Smith against Texas will do well. I think he'll do well in the national championship game if the Buckeyes do play there. He's going to do well against everyone. I think that Jeremiah Smith is the epitome of Ohio State's wide receiver room, where you can never stop them. You just have to limit them, or you have to outdo them, which now with Jim Knowles and his defense is going to be very hard to do. It's possible. Nebraska did it. Michigan did it. The latter was, I think, due to some coaching errors and a little bit with the Nebraska game too, but still, Ohio State's not invincible, but Jeremiah Smith is invincible. And it really helps Ohio State's cause to win the national championship. And also to put together one of the more impressive runs in terms of, beating top 10 opponents in a row, potentially of all time. So take from that what you will. Jeremiah Smith is an amazing player, phenomenal player. And he's humble too. A lot of some of these players at different schools do not have humility. And they kind of just fling themselves everywhere. And it's not likable. It's kind of gross. But that's not Jeremiah Smith at all. Jeremiah Smith just kind of shrugs his shoulders well, this is who I am. I've worked hard for it, but it's kind of just is what it is. It doesn't make me better than everyone else. It's extremely admirable. I like him. I really do. And I like Ohio State. It's hard to root against this Ohio State team when they're functioning this way. It is. At parts of this year, at parts of last year, and this is just me from an analyst standpoint, because I like good football. I like clean football. I like teams who go full throttle and just don't stop. And Ohio State didn't have that for any of this regular season except for maybe the Iowa game, part of the Indiana game, and the Western Michigan game. In 75% of the regular season games, they played very imperfect football and had a lot of critical weaknesses. It was the same part for Ohio State last season. This season, maybe even more so than last year at times, due to the fact that this team had higher expectations, and also due to the fact that this team lost to an unranked team, whereas last year's team didn't. But now that they're on, and they're playing pretty flawless consistently, it's easy to root for them, especially since they have a lot of high character guys like Jeremiah Smith, Travion Henderson, Will Howard, Emeka Egbuka, G. Scott. I think is a very selfless player. I mean, you look at Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, Jack Sawyer, Tuimola. I mean, their stars are stars on the field, off the field, with their physicality and their physical attributes, but also their minds. I mean, this team reeks of high football IQ. And Knowles, I think, is a Jesse Minter, Phil Parker level DC. Jesse Minter last season had, I think, the best performance as a DC in the nation by a country mile. Phil Parker had that in 2022. Now, Minter's doing good work in the NFL. If he were in college this year, I think Michigan probably wins more games if he stays with them. And Phil Parker's defense had a bit of a down year this year, but still was pretty good. And it's hard to win at Iowa with the talent they have, and he's done a pretty good job. But Knowles is at that level. I mean, this team didn't just have a generational defense this year. Remember, last year they had a generational defense too. They didn't just have an elite defensive performance this postseason. They had an elite defensive performance last postseason. The offense was basically Iowa-esque in the Cotton Bowl, and Ohio State was very close to winning because their defense kept getting sacks on Brady Cook, and Missouri couldn't run the ball. They also couldn't pass the ball. So he's produced two generational defenses back-to-back Who's to say next year's defense can't be that high of a level? Who knows if he'll maybe want to look for a head coaching job, although it's pretty late in the cycle. But also, Knowles is obviously, still in the college football playoffs. But he's an elite DC. He's one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinator in the country. And the Rose Bowl game was the epitome of his defense because there was a lot of three down linemen, a lot of only rushing three situations. It felt a lot like his Oklahoma State defense, and also a lot more like Ohio State's defense last season than at points this season. Where last season they just sent four. They were content sitting back in coverage, and most of the sacks they got were coverage sacks because they didn't get a ton of pressure on you because they didn't send a bunch of guys, but they were just so good in coverage that the QBs would just get lost and eventually find themselves in the turf. That was the Oregon game. Ohio State rarely blitzed, and when they did, keep in mind, Oregon got some big plays off of that. So what Knowles did, and maybe part of it was the fact that the team was up so much, is they just sat back, kept everything in front of them, no explosive plays, and, well, what do you know? You shut down one of the best offenses in college football. So Ohio State right now is the best team in the country. Oregon is one of the best teams in the country. They were just outclassed by an even better Ohio State team. The Ohio State Buckeyes march on to face Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and the Ducks stay home, and they're going to figure out what they need to figure out to have a successful 2025 season. So that is that right there, and then we just have a few more topics that I want to cover, but I'm going to take another break and just quickly drink some water and go to the bathroom. So I will see you guys very soon yet again, and thank you for being on. And welcome back, everyone. Alrighty. Let me see. Did OSU's O-line play its best game yesterday? Trying to think. Either that or the Penn State game was its best all season long. Either that or the Penn State game. Only reason I leave that caveat is because at some point yesterday it didn't matter what the O-line was doing, and that was pretty early in the game. Ohio State had to rely to a limited degree on its O-line for the entirety of the Penn State game. But it's close. I mean, I gave my flowers to Justin Fry. I said it even early in the reaction video. Good day for him. Seriously. Let me read. People were bantering in our chat. We are Penn State. Oregon beats Texas if they play like that for 20 plus. It's very possible. Ohio State can beat anyone by 20 plus because they can snowball you quickly, and they have an elite ceiling on both sides of the football. All right. Don't be surprised if Texas gets the ball first and then scores, but it really doesn't score for the rest of the game. Yeah, Ohio State's defense is actually not very good against scripted drives, like the first or even second drive of the game. They really tighten up as the game goes on, and that's what was shocking about the Rose Bowl, too. It was kind of the opposite. As the game started off, defense was perfect. As the game progressed, briefly there were moments where Oregon was able to find some offense. But is what it is. All right. Bless my nose. Let's continue with some of these topics here, and then we'll get out of here. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about why Jeremiah Smith will make history. True freshman wide receiver Jeremiah Smith had the game of his life, in my opinion, against the Oregon Ducks, where the young man, because he's a true freshman, he's not even 20, has a year or two more, I believe, before he hits 20. He had 187 receiving yards for 2 touchdowns, averaged 26.7 yards per reception against Oregon, and he has well over 1,000 receiving yards. He has 14 receiving touchdowns, and he's averaging around 17, 18 yards per reception on the season. He is a generational player, and he will make history. He's already made history, by the way. He set every single record by an Ohio State freshman wide receiver. Set all of them, receiving touchdowns, receiving yards, etc. But I think he'll go further than that, because that's just making history for a season or for single season numbers. I think he'll make a lot more history than just that. I think that Jeremiah Smith has the potential to be the best wide receiver in college football history. There. I said it. I don't think I've ever said anything like that before in terms of an individual player. It's just crazy. He is a unicorn. And he's not just a unicorn, he is a unicorn amongst unicorns, an alien amongst aliens. He's the alpha predator, Jeremiah Smith is. He has unprecedented skills, big hands, high football IQ, raw athleticism that I don't even know if all of it's been tapped into yet. Like, he might get even better than he is now next season. I mean, think about it. He's young. He hasn't stopped growing. He'll probably get taller, get a bit more muscle. Maybe his hands will get even bigger, and he'll just be an even better player. I mean, he's already unstoppable as is. Imagine how he'll be in a few seasons down the road, as he has 2 more years to play at Ohio State before he can enter the draft. He will be draftable in the 2027 NFL draft. So Ohio State has him for 2025 and 2026. And before we continue this video, if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And also, if you want to support the channel or join our Discord server, the links to those things are in the description and pinned comments, so check those out. By commenting your thoughts down below, you will enter our giveaway, which the announcement for that takes place January 9th and 10th at halftime during the semifinal games. The winners will be announced 2 at each halftime. $40 total in winnings, a $20 Visa gift card, and a $20 gift card to my merchandise store, which includes Ohio State-themed College Football with Sam t-shirts. By commenting, you have entered, and all I want you to comment at me down below is, what do you think Jeremiah Smith will accomplish at Ohio State outside of personal records? Do you think he'll win Ohio State a national title? 2? 3? How many Big Ten championships will he win? How many wins do you think? Well, yeah, how many wins do you think he'll earn against Michigan? Like, and what will he do season by season wise as well? Like, give me all of your thoughts, because Jeremiah Smith is a wonderful person and a wonderful player. And in the preseason, I said that, look, I'm accepting the hype. I'm buying into it because of what everyone's saying, and also because I trust Brian Hartline. In the preseason, I didn't trust certain things about Ohio State, but Brian Hartline was not one of those things, because Brian Hartline has done nothing to be doubted. Nothing one bit. So I said I was going to buy into the hype, thought he was a top 10 wide receiver immediately as a freshman, and even that wasn't enough. So what I'm essentially doing here is coming out and saying, guys, he is the nation's best wide receiver. He will be, barring injury, next year and the year after that, and he'll make history. He is a player that will be remembered forever, and he has a long NFL career. Again, barring injury or something like off the field related. If the off the field stuff is good, he will be remembered for decades. Like, I will be talking about him when I am old and when I am dying. I might even remember him if I get dementia. He might be that memorable. Not to like make light of that or anything, but just as a statement. That's just, he's that good. He's that good of a player. And he shows up in big games too. And when the ball is thrown his way, he wins. He wins those one-on-one battles. There's a reason why he has over 1,000 receiving yards. He may get close to 1,500 receiving yards, and he has 70 receptions as well. Had 100-yard games against Western Michigan, Oregon the first time around, against Northwestern, against Tennessee, and against Oregon. He's having bigger and bigger games now because the staff is utilizing him. They're throwing him the football more. And they're also, I think, taking better advantage of their offensive situation. They're going pass first now. This is more of a traditional Ryan Day offense from 2021, 2020, and aspects of 2022 that Ohio State should have never deviated away from. And they did due to this misconception of toughness, but that's then. That's the past. These past 2 games have shown that they're willing to try that again. And it's clearly working. And a large part of why that's working is not just because of Ibuka or G. Scott Jr. or Travion Henderson or Will Howard being a great quarterback. It's because Jeremiah Smith is an elite wide receiver, the likes of whom I've never seen. I'm too young to remember Julio Jones or some of these other great wide receivers, but I can say I've seen one now. I've seen a generational wide receiver. As Colby Vlash just said in my comment section, moderator on my channel, he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr. already, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was a unicorn, is a great NFL wide receiver. I've already seen elite wide receivers, both collegiately, and Harrison will be one in the NFL. Already is, just doesn't have a good situation. And Jeremiah Smith's already better than he is. If he entered the NFL draft today, he might be the first overall pick. Sounds crazy, but it's not. Jeremiah Smith, wonderful player, wonderful man, has integrity, selfless, and just throws it all out on the field and gives his best effort. He's an A-plus level player, 4.0 GPA. And I don't mean like I know his GPA. I mean, if we're ranking players by their grade and giving like a GPA for their performance, he has a 4.0, and he's the number 1 student. Number 1 football player up for Ohio State as a true freshman. Just absolutely crazy. So I wanted to talk about that because it's notable and it should be talked about. Okay, next up, Oregon football is not satisfied. You know what? You know what, actually? We will talk about this tomorrow because this show's already ran for 2 hours, 20 minutes, which is quite a long time. And we need topics for tomorrow, so I'm going to save this topic for tomorrow, guys, especially since I want to go to bed. These shows always run long, but that's because I have a lot to talk about, and I like to talk. So, someone said, "Darn, I remember Randy Moss." Yeah, we're gonna end this here tonight. We already, reacted to we already reacted to this stuff. We have a lot of content, of course, to do, and yeah, I think that we're good for tonight. So thank you all for coming on. Thank you for super chatting, for liking the video, for subscribing to the channel, for hitting the notification bell. I will see you all very soon, and bless me. Make sure to have a great day. Thank you very much for tuning in. And again, we'll be live tomorrow. We'll be live tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll preview the college football playoff games, two remaining, the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl. We'll talk about some topics surrounding those games, and we'll also talk about changes for Oregon, which is what I was going to, further harp on here, and how they're not satisfied with a good season. And we'll also talk about why Ohio State, clear favorite to win it all, and why Penn State should expect to win it all. So if you want to hear my thoughts on those, please make sure to tune in tomorrow. Thank you very much, and I will see you all very soon.